Good morning, Jim. How's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. My name is Michael Forrester, and I will be your guide through the perilous world of certification. All right. I'm gonna give it just a few minutes just to see who else might join. Do you work for Booz Allen?
I do.
Excellent. Are you in a current program, like a cloud engineering program or a software factory or anything like that? Or were you just invited to come to an exam prep?
Well, I'm currently supporting AWS infrastructure for a program that we've got.
Cool. Are you experienced with that? Do you feel comfortable with that? Or was it the hey, we need it, so therefore we need you to do it?
Well, when when we started this program a year and a half ago, nobody had any AWS experience. So we've been kind of learning it as we go for the last year and a half. And then they did offer the training and certification. So I'm probably strong in some.
All right. Okay, and just to make sure you're all here for the SysOps exam, right? System Operations Associate.
Yep.
Okay, excellent. All right. So my name is Michael Forrester. Let's talk about the steps that are going to be needed for this. So first of all, let me frame it up for you so we'll make sure we're all talking about the same language. So if you just type in AWS certification, you usually get the certification link, which is aws.amazon.com/certification. And remember these buttons here as far as schedule an exam. And ignore the prepare for an exam button. I'll tell you why in a second. But if you scroll down, you'll see that these are all the certifications that are possible, right? So you've got cloud practitioner, you've got the associates over in blue, and you got the 2 pros, and then you've got the purple kind of specialty exams. Notice that we just added SAP on AWS. Man, even I'm like, that's weird. Is there that much demand for SAP? Apparently there is. So cloud practitioner, and then the next level is the blues, next level is the greens, and these are all have a relationship with each other. So just to say this is that cloud practitioner is considered kind of the foundational exam, which then of course, these are the kind of higher level exams above that. And then you've got the pro exams, which are above this. Now, the exam that we're working on today, that we're talking about today, is this one, the SysOps Administrator exam. Now, the reason this one is a little different than the other exams is that the rest of these exams, all of them, do not have hands-on labs. But the SysOps exam does actually have hands-on labs. It actually has, 3 to 5 labs, and you usually find that out at the beginning, where you're gonna click through the console. You can use the command line if you want to, but you're gonna click through the console in order to achieve certain outcomes. So I'm gonna talk about like what that component consists of. But the bottom line is that it's the only one with a hands-on component. So having access to your own personal AWS account and having access to amazon.quicklabs.com is kind of essential, because you don't need to know the answer. You just need to know how to figure out the answer. And you need to know how to follow instructions really well. One thing I can tell you with like assured authority, as the person who wrote the scoring scripts for the exam, is that we do not test how you got there. We just test the end result. So if we ask you to do 3 things, like create a, take a CloudWatch metric, add an alarm to it, and then add a trigger to it so it sends a notification right when it crosses an alarm threshold. We don't care if it took you 50 tries of tying this, that, and the other to get there. What we're going to do is when you hit submit, we're going to go in and we're going to look for the CloudWatch alarm. We're going to make sure it's set to notification. We're going to, make sure it's set to SNS or whatever it is that we ask you to do, right? And we're going to check the name. So I know there's the other thing that, should you hear me say this, if we ask you to create a queue and it's called STSQ and it's capital STSQ, you probably want to name it exactly what we name it, okay? Because and they'll even block that out and say, make sure that you name it explicitly what we name it, because that's what we're looking for, okay? So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's what we're zeroed in on, is we're zeroed in on a 2nd tier exam out of 3 tiers, not including the specialties. We're focused on that middle, like the middle tier. If you don't have Cloud Practitioner, you don't have to have it. You can go straight to any exam that you want to, but be aware that having Cloud Practitioner, can build your confidence. You don't have to have it. And if you already have this exam and you take any of these exams, it's going to automatically refresh this exam. If you have this exam and you take this exam right here, it'll automatically both refresh this one and it will refresh this one if you already have it. These do not do that. So the purples don't do any of that stuff. Okay. Does it matter? For Booz, it does. Booz does actually care about the number of certifications that you have. So, if you want to go back and get your Cloud Practitioner later, just keep that in your back pocket. One question, are either of you under time constraints for this? Like, do you have to get it done within a certain time frame?
I think we are, or I think someone was telling me try to get done by the end of the year.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
Go.
I guess if you can get into that, I think that lab thing was one of the things I was less sure about. Like that would be cool to talk more about too.
Yeah.
The lab thing.
If it's not clear by the time I finish this phase, you let me know. We'll answer any
Okay.
questions you got.
I got you.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's dive into SysOps since that's not why we're here. So just so you know, I'm going to show you the whole process of scheduling an exam. I'm not going to go over that just now. It'll be the next thing that we do. Here's the things you need to know. This is a 180-minute exam. It's got 65 scored questions on it. Just between you and me, 50 of those questions actually count towards your score. The other 15 questions are, and it says this in the exam guide, is just as testing questions. So if you get a bunch of questions about recent services and you're like, man, that's really daunting. I'm not saying you shouldn't take those questions seriously, but just know that, almost like 25% of the exam, maybe 20%, is actually us just testing questions. They're not super off base, but if you get some squirrely questions, be sure to leave feedback because it might be an unscored item that we're testing. And if you leave feedback and say, man, this question is not clear, I want you to know all those comments are read. So feel free if you've got space to make comments on questions. Okay. Bottom line is, it's at 65 questions. It's 180 minutes. So you can do the math. If it was 60 questions, it would divide cleanly into 3 minutes apiece for each question against 180, but it's 65 questions. So you have a little bit less than 3 minutes per question to work it. I want you to keep that in mind because while there are 65 scoring opportunities, that those dimensions change when we actually talk about what's the number of lab questions you have versus the number of questions, like multiple choice, multiple right answer. So note here that the best way, step number one, the first thing you want to do is you want to download and look at the exam guide. Let me turn this off. All right. So the exam guide, which I'm going to paste the link in the chat so you can have it. The exam guide is your place, the first place that you look at, the first thing to start, and it's probably arguably one of the most important things, right? By the way, the questions are set before the exam. This is not a 1990s or 2000 Microsoft test or Cisco test. So Greg, we're not going to torture you by having an adaptive exam. I mean, I think harder exams are kind of cooler. But I think only more for professional level stuff, right? I think we would go higher for that. These, by the way, are not adaptive. So if you fail a question on EC2, we're not going to ask you more questions on EC2. So the question is static. The bank of questions, the form is static. It's set. So once you get it, you've got the whole thing. It's not going to adapt or change based on your responses. Hopefully that's a relief. So this is SOA C02. That's the exam that we're working on. Note that they want you to have 1 to 2 years experience in a SysOps role, experience in logging, experience with basic networking, architectural requirements, high availability, security, resiliency, cost optimization, the pillars of the well-architected framework. You should be, right? And that's general IT. And then the AWS knowledge includes the well-architected framework, a year's worth of knowledge, hands-on experience with AWS in production typically is what we recommend. Now, what are we not going to do? We're not going to ask you to design CI/CD pipelines or distributed architectures. We're not going to do crazy networking things because there's an exam for networking. We're not going to ask you to do anything related to development. Why? Because there's a DevOps Engineering Pro exam and there's a developer exam. And we're not going to do anything with security, data analytics, or machine learning. If we have an exam for it, it's probably not going to be on this exam, just to say that, right? So here's the deal. You got multiple choice and multiple response, which is going to fill out the bulk of your test. The bulk of your test is going to be 60 questions that are either going to be multiple single right answer or multiple right answers, right? Multiple like responses. So you get 2 or 3 right responses to choose from. You're going to see what that looks like. So when you begin your exam, you're going to receive a notification about the number of questions that are going to be in your multiple choice and multiple response, and the number of exam labs that you're going to have. Now, in general, you know, you're not going to end up with more than, say, you know, I think it's like 3 to 5, 3 to 6 labs. Now, the labs will have multiple steps. You're going to get about 20 minutes to do each of the labs. So about half your exam of the 180 minutes will be focused on those, you know, on the lab questions. The other 90 minutes is going to be, you know, 2 hours is going to be focused on the like trivia questions that you're going to be answering. Okay.
Can you just say that again?
Yeah. So about half to like 90 minutes to 2 hours of your exam is going to be focused on trivia, like answering questions. The other half of your lab is going to be focused on actually going through the console and setting up different things that we've asked you to set up.
Oh, so that inside the lab, they first say like, oh, what's the EC2? What's this? Well, blah, blah, blah. And you answer some questions and then you get to the console.
Yeah, then you get to like console. And by the way, that'll be done in stages. So if you have 3 questions, you'll get into a console, you'll do it, and then you'll hit submit, and that closes that lab 1, right? And then you do lab 2, you do you hit close it, lab 2 is done. So you'll like stage it out. It won't ask you to do all 5 lab scenarios at once in the same setup, if that makes any sense.
Does it just pop? I don't know. Sorry if you're already answering this and I'm just like not catching it, but is it like, okay, I get regular, like, you know, solution architect question type, you know, like just here's a question, answer, ABC, pick it. And then and then it just pops up all of a sudden, here's a lab to do.
No.
Oh, no.
It's
Okay.
all going to be questions. You're going to finish that portion of the test, and then you're going to
Yeah.
move into labs, and then you're going to finish that portion of the test.
Oh, okay. And the lab is, so is it really like only like one action? So it's like, okay, you're in the lab to ask you what's a queue about like this, what's the best way to organize a queue for this? And then they say, okay, now go in the console and set it up. And that's kind of like, you know, how it is, or it's like, is it like a lot more in depth where it's like, you're like setting up a whole kind of system or something?
No, what it'll do is it'll say, look, you've got a system that needs to be monitored. And so it'll give you a set of instructions. So I need you to create, you know, add this CloudWatch metric by enabling it somehow inside the EC2 instance. And then it'll say, now create an alarm on that instance with the, you know, threshold trigger that then enables SNS, and SNS should point to this email address. It'll give you a set of instructions. Those instructions will stay on the upper right-hand side, and then you'll have access to the console on the left. So you'll have the instructions to look at, and then you'll have the console, and it'll give you a series of steps. It's usually not more than about 5 or 6 things pertaining to the same area. Like it'll be all about CloudWatch SNS and SQS, or it'll say, you know, set up an RDS instance, or it'll say stand up 5, you know, EC2 virtual machines, you know, that are T3X larges, you know, with EBS volumes of 100 gigs in size. It'll be something like that, but it won't be where you're setting up an entire triple tier architecture with web app and database. They're not going to ask you to do that.
Yeah.
And they also won't ask you to like write CloudFormation typically.
And is it, so trying to think of this too, to schedule it, because I think you can do it, they'll remotely monitor you, or you could try to go to a center if it's open. But like, I'm trying to think, like, is a big screen advantageous, you know, like if you're able at home to put this on a like a separate monitor thing?
It is, and I'll talk about setups when we get to the exam registration.
Okay, no
Yeah.
problem. Yeah, I got you.
But yeah, I'll tell you honestly, you're only allowed 1 monitor because you can't have 2 monitors. The biggest monitor you can get is probably going to be the best for you. So just to say this.
Yeah.
Well,
I
I'll talk
kinda
about that when
figured.
we get to setups.
Okay.
Notice, by the way, you will receive full credit for this. You also will get partial credit for partial completion. So if we ask you to do 5 steps and the scoring opportunity is 5 points, and you get 3 of the things right, you're going to get 3 points. So unlike the questions portion of the exam, the lab portion of the exam, we will give you partial credit for. So just so we're clear. Like, but if it's multiple response and you need to choose 3 out of 6 and you choose, one of them wrong, you won't get partial credit, right? So just know.
You
Um,
mean like, so it's, okay, set up the queue, do this, blah, 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 and you set it up, but then you don't get the email address right, but then you do something else, but you get 1 out of 2 or set.
Right. You
Yeah,
get credit for
gotcha.
everything you got right, even if one of them was wrong, which is,
Okay,
yeah. So if you got 4 things out of 5 right, you get 4 points if it's a 5-point opportunity.
that makes sense. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because in a sense, just so you know, the labs are like bundles of questions, right? So it's like, if you think of it, if we ask you to do 5 things, then we're testing your knowledge about 5 things. And so we're going to give you a point for each of those questions, right? So we just, want to give credit where credit's due. I will tell you that you asked about the resolution. One of the things that's in the exam guide, which is the reason why we have you look at it first, is that it does talk about like some minimum resolutions that you want. Some people show up. And by the way, you're not going to use your booze laptop for this, so you need to use a personal item. The reason is that Zscaler will sometimes randomly block the OnView software that does this. And so you don't want to deal with that. That's a nightmare. People have lost their exams because of that. The rest of this, as far as like unscored content and whatnot, I wouldn't be too worried about. One thing that is actually super important is that out of 100, your score needs to be a 72. So it's a 1,000-point test, so 720, right? But that's all you need in order to pass. So, be aware that, we're not asking you to be perfect. We're asking you to have basically 3/4 of the knowledge that you need. Now, there are different domains here. I don't need you to memorize this. I don't need you to even really focus on it, because at the step 4 that we're going to get to towards the end has practice questions that are already weighted in this way. So you're going to use those practice questions to study, because that's what they're there for. They're not really for practice. They're really for studying. But one thing you need to do, this is step 1, is that you need to download this exam guide and you need to look through this whole section about where it describes the domains, nothing else. And make sure that you know what each of these are. If you don't know what a CloudWatch alarm is, and you don't know how to set a metric filter, and you don't know what CloudWatch dashboards or SNS or health events or service quotas are, you don't know what that is, then you want to write that down that you don't know it, and you want to go look at it inside of your own personal AWS account, find out where it's at, click around and look at it, because you want to. This is all stuff that shows up in Cloud Practitioner, so that you know the services, because Cloud Practitioner is really just a service recall test. But they're going to assume that you already know everything that you should know for Cloud Practitioner. If you don't know what EventBridge is, you want to look at that. You don't know what AWS config is, you want to look at that. You don't know what Systems Manager automation documents is. And just so you know, Systems Manager has like 22 subservices underneath it. So know what they do. You don't need to know how to use them exactly, although Systems Manager, you know a lot of that. But you need to know like what Ops Center does versus Patch Manager, right? You don't necessarily need to know how to use it, but you need to know what it's there for and what it does inside of Systems Manager. And by the way, this is not a lot of material. It's probably like 40 or 50 items that you're going to spend some time learning, but that's it. Understanding the different auto scaling plans, what RDS and Aurora replicas are, all that stuff. If you don't know what this is, you don't know the failover policies like weighted latency balance, geofencing. Oh my God, my brain just stopped working. There's 6. Failover weighted, multi-value, simple, latency based, geo based. There's one more I'm forgetting. RTO and RPO comes up a lot. You need to be able to rattle that off, right? Recovery time objective is how long is it going to take for you to restore the service? Recovery point objective is how much data can you stand to lose? Is it an hour's worth of data? Is it 2 hours? Is it 8 hours? Because that's the frequency of backups or data syncs, right? So just note, like, be crisp about knowing the answers to this. Create, manage, and troubleshoot CloudFormation. That's a little beast in and of itself. There are some CloudFormation labs, by the way, out in Amazon. But you want to go through this and say, I don't know what KMS is, or I don't know about ACM, the certificate manager. And now they've added like private key store and some other stuff. Do you know the difference between secrets manager and parameter store? Well, they're in different services, but like for example, secrets manager is the only one that does key rotation. Parameter stores, a secure string and parameter store will not do key rotation, will not do password rotation. So you'll see that distinction in questions, and you'll see that all of this gets covered in the practice exams. I just want you to know the services, know what they do. Okay. Notice it goes down to cost and optimization. We will never test you on specific numbers. Now, don't get me wrong. You need to know that an EBS volume probably isn't going to burst above 16,000 IO per second. You need to know that because that's a very specific number, right? But we're not going to ask you how much a T3X large costs per hour. We're not going to, how many CPUs does a T3X large has? How much memory does it? We're not going to test you on that. That's information you can look up, right? And then I would ignore the appendix and ignore, there used to be a section here about like what's not on the exam. Oh, look at, there it is. It's still there. Out of scope. I would ignore that. That's not really going to help you. It's just going to melt your brains. But if you're like curious about like, is machine learning on here? Well, if we go out here and look at SageMaker, we'll see SageMaker on the off list. But if I look up here, do I see it on the on list? No, because there shouldn't be a single piece of machine learning and analytics up here, and there's not. Okay. Okay. So step one, get the exam guide, go through the domain description section, make sure you understand which every single service is listed there. Write it down either digitally or physically if you don't know it, and go look it up. That's the first step. The other thing is if you have other questions about what's included in the exam or things like the resolution question even are typically answered here. This is a pass-fail exam, so you won't get your score right away. You are going to be told right away whether you passed or failed. If there's an error with the exam, they're going to pull one of us, like one of the certification technical architects in, and we're going to look at your entire, like, we're going to watch the video of you doing the thing. Don't be embarrassed. We all click around in the console trying to figure it out. But what will happen is that we're going to look, and if we see that you eventually got to the outcomes that you needed, we'll let you know whether you passed or failed. The other thing is if you do something squirrely, like one time my son popped in because, he's a teenager, and he was like, S3 is the answer. And of course, I'm in an online exam, which is horrible, right? Immediately, the proctor's like, I got flagged. It took them a couple of days to review for security purposes, and then they got back to me and said you passed. So just know that if you decide to take it at home, which I'm going to talk about in a second, which I do not recommend, no one can be in the room. You do not get a break. You need to be at a table where you can take pictures of all four sides of your desk. You can only have one monitor, keyboard, mouse. You can't have any devices nearby. You can't have a glass of water. It needs to be completely devoid of anything for 3 hours while you take this exam. I would recommend that you go to a testing center. At least then you can actually go to the bathroom. Okay. Of course, that varies by testing center, so I say that. So exam guide is the first thing. Just take a quick skim, figure out which services you don't know. Okay. We're going to extend step one a little bit because I want to show you how to schedule an exam really quick. Some of you probably got vouchers from your class, which is awesome. But what you're going to do is you're going to click on schedule an exam and you're going to click on sign in. I'm going to show you where to stick those vouchers. If you have a partner login and you know what that is, and I think it might be on your degreed page for those of you who don't know, then use the partner login. If you don't know your partner login or can't find it, don't freak out. Just choose logging in with an Amazon account, not an AWS account, which means that technically you could sign in using your Gmail account. There is actually an option on the degree page that will allow you to link your personal Amazon account to your Workday profile. Does anyone know what I'm talking about when I say Workday profile? Because I've never seen it. I just know it exists in Booz.
Yeah, I've always found that system hard to use though, like Workday. But yeah,
Well,
we have that.
Yeah, so ask someone for help if that's the case. But I would just use your personal email address for this. I don't know why that keeps popping up. That's weird. Give me just 1 second. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to switch over here because I'm not sure why that's doing that. Okay, let's go schedule an exam. Let's go sign in. Yep, that's what it's supposed to do. It's weird. All right, log in with Amazon. All right. So here, I'm just going to log in. I'm just going to use my personal account for this, right? Or maybe not. Wow, the demo gods are not being kind today. That's weird. This usually just works right out of the box. Let's get this going. All right, let's try it again. Sign in. Sign in. Yep. And you're popping up, but you're not gonna fill things in. Okay. There we go. All right. So once you sign in, and by the way, notice I just used a personal email address because that way it just stays with me. You're gonna be redirected. And notice I used to log in on the left. You can use your Booz Allen email address here. You're creating an Amazon account, not an AWS account. Whatever you do, do not use your Booz Allen email address to create an AWS account. Security team doesn't like that. Once you're here, you're in a branded searchmetrics.com account. So notice in the upper left-hand side, it says searchmetrics/Amazon. So you're in a branded separate location. Here, if you click under exam registration, this is where you can come in and you can actually register for exam. I do actually recommend Pearson VUE. They're actually ending PSI, I think towards the end of the year. Notice that SOA 0 C02 matches what's in the exam guide. We were just looking at it. So what you would do is you would come in here and you would like follow all the prompts, but it's going to like log you into Pearson VUE under this special Amazon.com site. Notice it says use a personal computer, like, but this is a note to mainland China. But notice that like exhortation to use a personal computer, do that, right? Notice that you can do it online at your house. Again, I recommend that you do it, at a testing center at your house. I recommend that you do it at a testing center. Just find one near you and go to it. If that's not an option, you can do it online. Please read all of this documentation because you need, 2 forms of photo ID. You need to make sure your testing space is set up correctly, et cetera, et cetera. And then they're going to ask you to check the boxes on a bunch of questions. Like, first of all, what written language do you want it to be in? And then they're going to ask you to check facial recognition, acknowledge the rescheduling policies. You do want to read all this. We're not going to go through it because you're going to do it yourself at some point in time. But they're going to track your physical location. They're going to acoustically fingerprint your room. They are going to do facial comparison. They are going to, you can cancel your appointment within 48 hours, et cetera, et cetera. You can reschedule. Here's cancellation, et cetera, et cetera. Note that if you take it online, you will not be permitted to stand up or leave in any way, shape, or form. These are the personal items that you cannot have. So they cannot be in reach the entirety of the exam. You touch a phone, you're out. No scratch paper, no mumbling or speaking out loud, no hiding your face. You have to do all instructions. There's no food or beverage or anything during the entire process. Okay.
I got a quick question.
Yeah.
So no standing. I've got a sit-stand desk for reasonable accommodations purposes, disabled. And so I've got a desk that raises and lowers. Am I not allowed to do that for 3 hours?
Yeah. So what will happen is that you'll have to talk to the proctor actually and ask them at the time if that's acceptable, because I've heard no's and yeses. So I think it depends on the proctor. So just let them know ahead of time that you have a standing desk. And then what you probably they'll ask you to do is they'll say, please let me know when you decide to change positions. Okay. And then they'll pause your exam and then have you stand up. Just be prepared though. Sometimes the answer is no. They're not going to let you transition.
I guess if you go to a test center, they also have their own rules, right? So they might say, the monitor's not that good, or the other people are making noise that might be in there, or it's too hot, it's too cold, whatever, too, right?
Yeah.
Regulated.
Everybody's different, but everything's regulated.
Yeah.
It's the same monitors, same computers. No,
Oh, it is.
Yeah, everyone's held to the same process. You don't bring your own PC if you go to a testing center.
Well, I was thinking that each test center outfitted their own like monitors and computers and stuff.
They are, but they're all uniform. They're all the same.
Yeah, it should be uniform. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Jim asked, because it depends on the proctor. Then they're going to ask you what language you want the proctor to speak. They just had it Spanish, which is hilarious because for a while it was just, Nihongo Daikimasu ka in English. So then you choose your time zone. Typically, they're going to figure out what your time zone is, and they're going to let you know what they think it is, confirm it. And then, like, for example, you could probably take SysOps today. Today's the 4th. You probably could take it today if you wanted to. So notice they've got some time slots. Notice this is 11 to 4. You can explore more times. I think this time interface has gotten a little weird. But regardless, notice that you can look at a time chunk that you're looking for, and they'll say, do you want to start at 11 or you want to start at 12:30? Now remember, 3-hour exam, right? So plan on being there the entire 3 hours. But they're going to give you time chunks so you can figure out like what time slots you want. General rule of thumb: pick a time slot where you are awake without coffee. You can't go to the bathroom. So you drink a bunch of coffee, which is a diuretic. You're going to want to go to the bathroom. Nothing worse than spending the last hour of your test needing to go to the bathroom, but you can't because you're going to fail the test if you leave, right? Which is kind of horrible. So make sure you just manage all those expectations. And then let's say, we want to book the appointment that they proffered, the 11 a.m. one that they gave us right off the bat. They're going to confirm some things, and you can add another exam if you want to. You're going to proceed to checkout. But this is what's important. If you got a voucher, this is where you stick the voucher. Right here. So once you stick the voucher in there and you hit apply, because this will go gray at that point in time instead of being faded out, all this stuff pretty much for the most part goes away. You hit next, which I can't do because I'm not going to buy the exam. And then what will happen is it's going to send you a bunch of emails confirming that you need to read the policies. You understand this. And then immediately the first thing you want to do is stick it in your calendar. Immediately just stick it in your calendar and say, look, this is the date. Block off 20 or 30 minutes before because you're going to want to show 20 or 30 minutes early. They're going to send you an email that says that, by the way. The first time you do this, please do not show up any later than 15 minutes early. You're going to use your phone on with you when you go, if you're not at a testing center. So if you do it online, you need to show up early. If you're at a testing center, you can just show up 15 minutes early and forget about it. If you're doing it online, ideally, you would show up 30 minutes early your first time because there's going to be a bunch of unfamiliar stuff. You need to have your documentation with you. You're going to take pictures of all 4 sides of your desk. You're going to pull stuff off your desk. And, just to be frank, usually what I do is I just grab a laptop and I just walk into the dining room. And then I actually run a physical cable from my router because I have like a 50-foot cable. And I just spool it out, kick everybody out of the house, pull the dining room table away from the wall because one side of it's against the wall. Just take pictures of all 4 sides. The bottom's glass. They love that because they can see underneath it. So there's nothing hidden. Plus there's a mirror behind me. So as the video camera hits my face, there's a mirror behind me so they can see the entire room. They absolutely love that. So just know that there's a lot more shenanigans you have to go through for the at-home test than for the one that you would take at a testing center. Okay. Questions? You guys are like, no, we're not taking the exam now. Forget it, Forrester.
When I listen to these things, it makes it sound really hard to take it at home. But I actually I did that for 2 or 3 of these, and it wasn't that. I didn't think it was all that bad. But yeah, it is a pain to try to sit and not be able to like leave. It's I think the one negative.
Yeah.
But
I like to lower expectations. So
yeah, but the test center, which maybe I look at that too, but it's like you go in there and yeah, who knows? Like the other people are distracting. It's too cold. It's too hot. It's like other things out of your control. Like if you take that option too.
yeah, the testing center is usually set to normalization. No one's allowed to disturb anybody else. I haven't had a single disruptive event at a testing center. I've even had somebody mad outside, but the thing was soundproof, so nobody.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So they do a good job of modulating everything. And this is at a local community college. It's at a professional place. The professional places are even more tight. So everyone knows not to mess with anybody else. Okay. So step 1 is really the exam guide. Make sure you go through it, you know the services. That's step 1 to prepare for the exam. The rest of this was just information so you could have it, right, to know like how to sign up and stuff like that. Okay, so then what's step 2? So step 2 is that if you took a class with WebAge, which if you're here, you did, is that you should have gotten access to a student portal, no? And in that student portal, let's see. You should have gotten access to some study guides. Let's see here. Let me pull up the system operations. Oh, this is fall. So this is an older one, so yours might be more up to date because this one's like almost a year old at this point. But what should have happened is that you would have gotten to access to a spreadsheet called the Certification Study Guide. This study guide would contain a bunch of white papers, digital trainings, web pages, videos, maybe even a couple of labs that would be relevant for you studying for the SysOps exam. Included in that would have been some multi-lab workshops on observability, some labs on security. All of this, by the way, would have probably been through Quick Labs. Although I think that this one was on the well-architected framework. Let's go take a look. This is an observability workshop. Yeah, so oh man, this is a great workshop. Oof. Extensive. But it'll take you about 3 or 4 hours to complete all the modules in this one. But this will teach you everything you want to know about observability with AWS with the latest tools, just to be frank. Real-time user metrics just came out within the last like year or two. Evidently is relatively new. So the workshop links that are in there, like I gotta tell you, especially this one, there's troubleshooting observability. I would kick the tires on that. You probably will require your own personal AWS account, which you should have anyway, to do this. And you might be worried about costs, but let me just make this recommendation with you. It's like the Boy Scouts. Leave no trace. If you're gonna go do a lab, do the lab and don't walk away from it. Right? If you have to walk away from it, delete everything that's there and then walk away from it. Because if you leave something running for a couple of days, you end up spending like $20, $30 and you're like, that's not what I wanted. I've never spent more than $100 in my test and lab accounts. And those were on really heavy months. For the most part, I spend like $1 a month on my Play account for AWS. So just be aware that this certification study guide is supposed to help you study by giving you access to the white papers, to scripting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to get you some more hands-on experience and both expertise with AWS. So in a way, this is actually steps 2 and 3. Steps 2 is to study the white papers and do the video pages. Step 3 is to get hands-on. And this is where Amazon.quicklabs.com comes in. If you're looking at this and you're saying, well, Michael, I'd like a little bit more, just so you're aware, it has a second option outside of your student portal. If you're looking for a more detailed one because you want to cover more like facets because you're not feeling confident for whatever reason, just know that there is these things called AWS ramp up guides that a couple of us wrote. I want to say they're like 2 or 3 years old at this point. But notice that one of the guides, and there's a technology guide down here. So if you like need to know more about containers, there's guides here. These guides are super cool. If you click on the system operations one, what will happen? And I'm going to paste this in the chat. Actually, I'm going to paste that whole website in the chat just so you can have access to it. These ramp-up guides basically will allow you to dive into white papers, digital trainings, even some classroom trainings, but know that you do have to pay for those, so maybe avoid those. You know, if you've taken the class already, the class gives you about 60 to 80% of the knowledge you need. You don't need Tech Essentials if you've already taken the System Operations on AWS class. Now, note here that there's white papers, web pages, more digital trainings, more white papers. Remember, this is an associate's level exam. I do not need you to memorize the white papers. If this was professional or specialty, I would tell you, hey, memorize those white papers, memorize those research papers. But that's not what's happening. What I want you to do here is I just want you to skim them, get the high level ideas, make sure you understand the concepts that we're talking about. But this is going to build foundations for cloud operations, deeper dive into one or more of these particular focus areas, which might be governance, monitoring, observability, centralized operations management, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, these are all great learning resources. And notice it's going to tell you how long it's going to take. You know, you're looking at probably 90 minutes here, right? A little bit longer. And then once you get through most of this, if you're looking for something longer, then you can actually take the prep, the digital exam prep for Systems Operations Associates. And then after you take the practice tests, which I'm going to give you in a second, you'll be ready to take the exam. But I just want to say this. Step 1 is to look at the exam guide. Step 2 is to look at the certification study guide and do all the white papers and all the kind of system design learning. Step 3 is to get hands-on with these self-paced labs or your own AWS account, including the links that are in the certification study guide. Or if you need something deeper, you can use this. But no, you can always fall back to the certification study guide. The one we provide is the one that gave us the 80% pass rate. If we use this, our pass rate would actually be lower because most people are not going to do this level of training. It's just too much with a full-time job. The amount of people that we had compliant with this was lower. So we slimmed this down, and that's why we came up with the certification study guide. So that step 2 is to get the ideas, the concepts down. Step 3 is to get hands-on with the labs. Step 4 is to do some practice exams, which I'm going to talk about here in a second. But I just want to make sure before we move on, are you clear about how to use the certification study guide that you have inside your student portal versus this ramp up guide? Is that clear when you would use one or the over the other?
I'm not sure if it is. I think, I mean, so the student portal study guide is basically like a, try to do all this stuff before you take the exam. It's got a lot of stuff. And then the ramp up guide is like, I guess it's like almost like similar to the class itself.
Well, the ramp up guide is 4 times as much stuff as what's in the certification study guide. So the ramp up guide, the one we're looking at here right now, is more like we're going to make sure you're overtrained for the role, right? The certification study guide is really just a study guide for the things you need to know for the certification.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. Taking a note
Yeah.
on that.
So this ramp up guide is actually ramping you up for the role, and it's a lot more training than most people do. Whereas the certification study guide is really just about what are the core concepts and things I need for the role in relation to the certification. So the ramp up guide goes deeper. The certification study guide is a little more shallow. The 80% pass rate that we've achieved is off of the certification study guide. And by the way, that 20% that failed were people who did not actually follow any of these steps. So our pass rate's actually probably much higher. Before we move on to practice exams, one thing I just want to reassert, and we talked about this at the very beginning, is that some of these links, for example, are actually in Skill Builder, and some of the older links in the certification study guide are actually in Quick Labs. Skill Builder, by the way, is Amazon's new location for labs and new locations for like practices, right? So here I'm just logging in using the same username and password I use for Amazon.com, not AWS, but Amazon.com. And it's just going to log me in. And what will happen is you'll click on this enroll button if you're not already enrolled, or start if you already are enrolled. Some of these questions, some of these things like require a subscription. And so this is why we also haven't been using the ramp up guide, is that Amazon just recently kicked in a subscription model for Skill Builder, whereas previously all this content was free. So the certification study guide contains links that for the most part are still free. The ramp up guide will contain links that are paid. So just that's the other distinction between the two guides. If I go back to the study guide, for example, these Quick Labs, which is the other location where you can do labs. If I go to sign in, these labs are still here and still working. So let's do this one. Let's go take a look. This is perform a basic audit. Let's go take a look at basic audit. Basic audit. There it is. Sometimes they just shift the URLs. The names are still the same. So if you ever find that the URL seems to be broken, just grab the name and search for it. I'll try and update these sheets, but hopefully that's been fixed by a more recent sheet. So here, by the way, we're performing a basic audit. You're just going to hit start lab. It's going to ask you, do you want to spend the credits? You say yes. Just so you're aware, when this timer right here hits 0, the temporary AWS account that's created for you to play with deletes itself. It closes. Okay. So just know that once you hit start and that timer starts counting down, you've got an hour to finish a 30-minute lab. How do I know it's a 30-minute lab? Because usually it'll say the duration down here and it should say 30 minutes, but sometimes it doesn't. So here, like in this particular lab, it would actually have a link where you log into the lab environment, put you in an AWS account, and then you would start working these steps. You would go to the console, you would hit the search bar, search for IAM, then you would go select users, choose user 1, look at the summary section, look at the security credentials. You just follow the recipe that it gives you. And while you're there, you want to click and look around and see what's going on to make sure you understand conceptually what IAM is used for. For example, IAM has users, groups, and roles. What are those 3 things used for? Do you know? Take some notes while you're there. If you don't, you probably want to go read the docs. right? And the best way to get to them is just type in AWS documents, documentation. And usually the first link is docs.aws.amazon.com. You can literally go here and say, look, I want documentation on IAM, or you can just click on IAM, right? But if you like, I don't know what IAM roles are, just type in IAM roles. It'll take you straight to the IAM documentation. You can go to the user guide as an example in HTML. And then notice that, you know, there's like a bunch of options here, but you could search in this guide for roles. And it'll take you, give you a direct link. Okay. You want to be methodical like that, because not only will it help you with the certification, but it's going to help you with your job. Like, because just as an example, roles are obviously used, are preferred, has a security mechanism over using any kind of service user or whatever. Maybe in a service account would probably be the next preference, but roles, right? So just know that if you create an account under amazon.quicklabs.com, using your Booz Allen email address, you will have unfettered access to all the labs here. So if you come back to this and say, Michael, you said something earlier about, provisioning a database. You can type in RDS, which is the relational database service, and it will give you labs on how to set up RDS, how to set up the relational database service, like how all this will function. Okay. Questions about how to get access to hands-on labs in AWS?
Maybe, so in the class, we went to webage.quicklabs.com, right? So that's,
Yep.
don't do that, right? And
Don't do
then
that.
you're saying go to amazon.quicklabs is the one we want now. And that's,
Yep.
okay. I can't remember, were we using a different one that was something else, .quicklabs.com, or no? This was just those two. Okay.
www is the public site. WebAge is WebAge's private link that you use when you take one of their AWS classes. Amazon.quicklabs.com is a hidden site. You won't find it on the public thing that allows you to take these labs. It's really just for Booz, honestly.
Okay, cool. So go in there and then, yeah, I think somebody was saying, right? This one, there's credits for you and then they refresh too, right?
Yeah, so you'll see the credits are shared as a pool, so you'll see the credits go down. Like I think
Yeah.
yesterday I was with somebody and there was 2,000 credits in there, which is a lot, by the way. And
Yeah.
as they approach 0, we get a notification and they refresh it.
Yeah, okay, cool, okay.
There's one other place that I want you to just keep in your back pocket. You probably don't need it for anything you're doing now. But if someone comes to you and says, hey, I need to do something with GraphQL, which I think I was asked that the other day, and I'm like, I don't even think I've touched GraphQL. What do they call it in AWS parlance? They call it AppSync. See, so just so you know, and I'm gonna paste this into chat, Amazon is starting to aggregate all of their public workshops. So for years and years, AWS has been publishing these public workshops at a variety of URLs scattered all over the internet. Nobody knows about them except for the instructors. And I have to go out there and Google them and find them at random because there's no index of all of the public workshops that are available. Well, we all said something to AWS. They got wise about it. And so now they have this index called workshops.aws that contains every free public workshop that you can run inside your account, and they're maintained and managed by AWS. Now, when I say inside your account, you're going to need your own AWS account to run these workshops, but they typically cost less than $1 to run, and they are totally worth it. Like, I'll give you an example. There's a workshop out here called the EKS workshop, which is about Kubernetes, which I'm actually an advocate for AWS.
Okay.
So there's an immersion workshop, and I got to tell you, once you get into this whole thing, this workshop is just spectacular around Kubernetes. It's going to teach you about autoscale. It's going to teach you all. It's not even really about AWS. It just teaches you about Kubernetes, which is a third-party, very popular piece of software. And there's another one buried in here somewhere. I think it's called EKS workshop. EKS workshop, which is another workshop that's inside that list of workshops, right, that we can look at. And so just know that, like, there's tons of workshops about topics. So if you're ever working for a client and they say, yeah, you know, we want to use DynamoDB, and you're like, I don't know anything about DynamoDB, keep this in your back pocket. Come here, kick the
Right.
tires on DynamoDB, learn the
Yeah.
technology, and these workshops will give you enough information to deploy it correctly. So just keep this in, you know, keep it in your back pocket for that.
This
use.
is more for on the job, like not necessarily the test, but is that
I mean, if you don't know CloudWatch and you can't find labs on you know,
It could be
Amazon.quicklabs.com, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
okay?
Yeah, because if we come
Sounds
out here and
really
look
good. Yeah, I didn't know this was here. Yeah, I didn't know about this one.
for, ooh, I gotta tell you, I'd probably do that one actually for the for the exam.
Yeah.
I probably would do that one because it's got Systems Manager and CloudWatch. Oh, forget about it. Yeah.
Okay, let me write that down. So there's AWS CloudWatch and Systems Manager.
Yeah. I think to be honest, almost every like service in the exams is covered out here. So, and there's even third-party stuff like oh God, Bridge. What's the name of that Bridge service that we were using the other day? Bridgeview or ViewBridge. Anyway, everything's out here. So definitely the core AWS services, but I mean they've got CI/CD, and I mean it's just ridiculous. So just keep that, and it could be relevant for the exam. So that's another way to get hands-on experience, is that if you got your own AWS account, because just to say this, like if we go to the EKS workshop to start the workshop, they're going to ask you, and by the way, they're not all as polished as this one. This one's like really good. They're going to say, create an the AWS account because you're going to be using it. But if you've already got your own AWS account, you don't need to create one, right? You just need to follow these instructions and make sure that you have it set up properly. So, oh yeah, they got other links down here. Okay, that's enough for step 3. We could get lost in this all day long. Okay, let's talk about step 4, and then we'll take a short break, and then we'll do a little practice, and then we'll call it. Okay, so step 4. So step 1 is to read the exam guide, make sure you know what services, you know what every service is. Step 2 is to read the white papers and whatnot, and get all comfortable with that. Step 3 is to do some hands-on experience, CloudWatch, Systems Manager, you know, whatever's, you know, EventBridge. Find labs either on Amazon.quicklabs.com or, you know, on the workshop pages, and go find labs on those things if you haven't touched it before. The last thing, and this is the last hurdle, this is the test. This is the final step that you want to pass before you to know whether or not you're ready to schedule the exam. And this is the practice exams. Now, if you've taken a class with us, sometimes we provide these for you, but I just want to tell you, they're $15 and they last for 3 years. So they're totally worth it. But this is Tutorials Dojo, and WebAge nor Amazon has any relationship with John Bonzo, who runs this whole thing, except that John does consult with Amazon to make sure he's not doing test dumps. So, you know, he does actually come to us and, you know, ask for approval for some of his questions. But if you come in here and we actually take a look at the SysOps exam, here's the SysOps. Here it is. So I've already logged in and I've already purchased it. But like I said, if you wait till the Friday after Thanksgiving, by the way, it'll probably be like $10, but usually it's $14.99. And so John has a variety of practice test types that are underneath his content, but under Tutorials Dojo, the only one that should matter to you for our purposes is the review mode exam. That's it. We don't care about any of the others. If you want to do section-based, that's the only other one I would highly recommend, but the rest of these, ignore. Review mode are the only ones that I really want you to focus on. Here's why. If you can come out here and take one of these 6 tests and pass it first try within 90%, you're ready to take the question portion of the SysOps exam. So if you can't pass it, I don't really recommend you do that. You don't have to test yourself. Just assume you don't know it, right? Let's just assume we're not ready. And if we know that we're not ready, what I recommend you do instead is that I want you to take one of these exams, and it doesn't even matter which one, and I want you to take it again and again until you can get a 90% on the questions. And then I want you to take a second one. I don't even care which one it is. So let's say the first one's 3 and the second one's 6. I want you to take the second one again and again until you can get a 90%. And if you've never touched AWS, I want you to take a third and do it again and again until you get 90%. You're like, Michael, that's crazy. Yeah, it is crazy. Here's why. One, if you can take 2 or 3 of these exams and get 90%, so you've learned the material, even if it's just straight up memorization, because I got to tell you, if you memorize 195 items, and I've talked to this with the head of certification at AWS, you deserve to pass the exam. I just want to be frank about it. You put in the work because you have inadvertently learned AWS by memorizing the answers to these questions, just so you know. Now, of course, we don't want that. We don't want paper certifications, which is why there's a lab, which I'll talk about the lab in a second. But the deal here is that I want you to go through the review mode sets one at a time to get 90%. You're going to lose points for nervousness, and these are not exam dumps. So these questions are not going to look the same when you get there. So you're going to lose points for that. But if you get a 90%, I'm pretty sure you're going to land at the 80, this, 780 or whatever that you need in order to pass the exam. Plus, you will have learned so much. Let me give you an example. Let's say that we decide to take review mode set 1, right? And we're gonna start with this one. I'm sure I've already answered some of these questions because I go through them all the time. But let's say I go through here and let me show you why these are so important, because they're really study exams. They're not practice exams. By the way, you won't know what section you're taking in the real exam. It's not going to list the domain that you're in, just FYI. Okay. So here we've got a real estate company. It's leveraging an elastic load balancer that uses a TLS certificate to provide basically, HTTPS security to its website visitors. Users are reporting that outages because the TLS certificate expiry. I'm not sure what that's about. And that the SysOps administrator needs to find a solution that automates the renewal of the certificate. So without even looking at the answers, I can tell you right now, it's going to involve the certificate manager, right? It's going to involve certificate manager. Why? Because as far as I know, it's the only service that will automatically renew a certificate. Before that, we had to use Lambda and do it manually and blah, 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 right? So even without looking at all these answers, right, there's a third-party certificate. By the way, typically Amazon's never going to recommend a third party, just so we're clear. So here's the certificate manager to request insert it with an ELB, build a Lambda function that renews the certificate. Unnecessary, because I've already got a service that will do that. That's what the certificate manager service is for. John's going to tell you why the answer you chose was either right or wrong. He's then going to tell you why the other answers are wrong. If you don't know why the other answers are wrong, you're probably guessing. Nothing wrong with guessing, but the majority of this exam should not be you guessing. Should be you saying exactly what I said. Oh, it's ACM. You know why? Because it's the only one that does certificate renewal. That's not the answer. Then someone has built an automated platform using Lambda to make that happen, right? John is then going to give you the references, the explicit AWS documentation that shows why his answer is right. And then if you keep missing questions about certificate manager, you probably want to go through and just look at John's cheat sheet and maybe skim this, because that means you don't know certificate manager. And so you probably need to skim it. And as a SysOps administrator associate, you're going to need to know it. Okay. Let's look at the next one. Administrator has launched new AWS accounts. Management wants the IAM users across all accounts to be able to sign in using a single login URL as shown below. How can the administrator meet the requirements? Well, if you've been inside IAM, you know that you can set your own URL just by creating what's called an account alias. So mine is M Forrester, right? So consolidate accounts using organizations, launch new AWS accounts. Alias. Oh, that's a good question. Alias for the root account. A single sign-on. Actually, you can do single sign-on, but that's not one of the answers here. I suspect that's what they're going to say, is that you can't actually do it. So there is a single sign-on service, but it's not mentioned in the answers. So without the single sign-on service, you actually can't create a single URL login, because each account has its own account number and it has its own account alias. So if you don't use the single sign-on service, which is also now known as Identity Center, you can't actually do what they're asking. So actually, technically, it's not possible with these answers. Okay. But again, we can go through and say, well, how come that was the wrong answer, right? Consolidate using organizations. It's like the alias tutorials dojo will only apply to the root account, will not be inherited by member accounts. Right? That's what you learn. So these practice exams, the reason you do them after you've studied the white papers and after you've done the labs is that this is going to like reinforce the knowledge so you can pass the question portion. Now, that all being said, how do you pass the lab portion? Well, this is where more than any other exam, I'm going to recommend that you do labs like CloudWatch and Systems Manager. I want you to do labs on EC2 and RDS. I want you to do at least 4 or 5 deep level labs that are all part of system operations items in order to be prepared. In other words, there's no great litmus test I can give you to be prepared for those labs other than get familiar with the console. Do 4 or 5 labs of a broad variety that allow you to click through the console so you can get familiar with it. Because remember, we're not interested in whether you can go directly there. We're interested in whether or not you can figure it out. Does that make sense to both of you?
Wait, I'm not sure. You mean you said you want to know if we can figure it out? Oh, like not that we memorize the steps, but that we can like follow instructions.
Right. For the lab portion, not the questions, because even the questions memorization isn't going to help you, right? But for the lab portion in particular, we want to know, can you figure it out? Can you follow instructions and can you figure it out? Can you follow requirements? Because that's what they really are. They're like requirements. I need a queue with this label that
Okay,
does this.
okay.
Yeah. So the only way to be prepared for the lab portion is that we need you to do 4 or 5 labs and we need you in the console. We need you to be comfortable with the console, comfortable with the checkboxes, comfortable with understanding where to find things and where to click things. For example, where's CloudWatch logs? It's under CloudWatch, right? Where is automation for Systems Manager? It's under Systems Manager, right? If you want to create EBS volumes, where does that live? Well, it's under EC2, most likely, right? But being able to figure that out is what you want you to do. So you need some time in the console for that. So the practice exams are going to give you like a watermark to know whether or not you're ready for the question portion, but there's really no way to know whether or not you're ready for the lab portion until you do 4 or 5 labs. And then if you feel comfortable figuring it out, then you're probably ready to go. Okay. So that's step 4. Questions?
Actually, can you say step 1 again? I was trying to write down your steps and I just want to make sure I got that one.
Yeah, so step 1 is go back to the exam guide and read everything in the domain section and make sure you understand what every single service listed there does.
Okay.
Not the in scope, not the out of scope list. Ignore the list beyond this, but the domain section that explains what the domains are. Every service that's listed there, I want you to know what it is right off the top of your head.
Okay, I gotcha.
That's step 1. Step 2 is go do either the certification study guide or a ramp up guide and do everything that's listed there. I recommend the certification study guide, but if you're feeling not that confident and you want more training, use the ramp up guide. That's step 2. Do everything that's listed in the ramp up guide. Step 3 is to get more hands-on experience. So over and above what you've already done with the ramp up guide or with the certification study guide, I want you to pick 4 or 5 labs inside of the AWS workshop or on Quick Labs. And I want you to do 4 or 5 additional labs to get you exposure to the console. I want you to understand what's in the console, where to find stuff, where to click, right? Step 4 is I want you to go to Tutorials Dojo and either use your voucher if you have one or buy for $15 the SysOps exam. And I want you to take the review mode exams, 2 or 3 of them, until you can get a 90% on each of the exams. So do one until you can get 90%, do a second one until you get 90%, do a third until you can get 90%. And then you are ready to take the exam at that point in time.
Wait, why review mode? There's time mode, blah, blah. Like, why is it review mode?
Time mode's not going to give you the answer. So
it doesn't? I thought it did. Okay,
yeah,
I got you.
Yeah, it'll let you look at it at the end, but it's not going to teach you while you're taking the question, like while you're looking at that question.
Right. I got you. In the time mode, is it the same questions or different?
Each bank is the same sets of questions, but they randomize when you take it every time.
Oh, okay. No, okay, cool. Okay.
Let's see. Let's do one more question, and then we're going to take a short break. and then we'll spend the remainder 30 minutes going through like practicing this. I'm going to show you how to analyze these questions. That's the last step, or not the last step. This is the last thing we do. So we got a static website in AWS. First of all, without reading anything further, if it says a static website in AWS, what service am I going to use to set up a static website in AWS?
The bucket, sorry, am I on, S3?
S3, right? So that's the first thing. Just know immediately that that's a possibility. So they got something written in Angular that allow users to calculate their net worth. SysOps uploaded the website's HTML, JavaScript, CSS, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and then enabled static website hosting. After a month, the website becomes a hit globally with over 1 million users. That's cool. However, there's some complaints about the site loading very slowly in some countries. First of all, what's changed about this website since in a month? What two things have gone up?
You mean, so it has HTML, JavaScript, or so it's JavaScript, I guess?
Well, all of that was there before. So over the last month, has it gotten more popular? What two things changed about this website?
Is there user content involved here? I guess, maybe, right? Maybe not.
But it hasn't changed, right? The content hasn't changed. They haven't indicated that it's changed. So what has changed?
The traffic, I guess. Definitely the traffic, right?
Traffic, right? So not only have they gone, with over 1 million users hitting the site a month, so that's an increase in scale, but now they're getting locations all over the world. So now they are a globally scaled website with up to 1 million users. Now, if this was an EC2 instance or a container instance or whatever, and we were hosting it, we would just scale up the horsepower, right? But there is another option. Which service is used to speed up the delivery of content, of static content in particular, globally across the entire world?
Like CloudFront, something like that.
Yep. So then you automatically know, even without looking at the answers, that you probably need CloudFront. But you want to read just to be careful, right? So load balancers can't go in front of S3. Elasticache is not used for that function. Cross-read replication is not going to help you unless you point the users to the second location, which it doesn't say anything about that capability. But this out of the box would help you by creating cached copies of your content, especially since it's static, for users to reuse based on whatever time to lives you set. So we then know, without even looking at the answers, that CloudFront has to be in the solution. Okay. So that level of analysis is what you want to be doing with these questions to learn the material. Okay. Questions about any of that?
That one wasn't too bad.
And, some of them are, just so you know, there are easier questions on the test and there's harder questions on the test, just like
Sure,
there's easier labs and harder labs. So we have this group of people called psychometricians, which I've never heard this term before, but they're basically data analysts who use data to analyze the psychology of whether a test is harder or easier. We got a whole team of them, and they look at the data on these questions all the time. And so they make sure that the banks of questions and labs are at what we call a kind of an average level, not a super high level, but at a level enough to test whether the candidate is able to actually apply basic system operations principles. So just know that you're going to have some easier questions, some harder questions, and it's all been normalized. So there's a lot of science behind it. Okay. So what I'd like to do now typically is I like to take a 15-minute break. And when we come back, we're going to spend about 25 to 30 minutes just going through a couple of questions just to make sure you get a feel for how to use these exams. And then we're done typically by 11, a little bit after 11, we're done. Okay. Is that okay if we take a short break?
Yeah, how long are you gonna break for, you think?
Yeah. So we're going to break for 15 minutes. So come back
15.
at 10:35, or, if you're at 9 or whatever, it's currently, 10:20 in my location. So 15 minutes and we'll meet back. Okay.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay.
All right. We'll see you in a
I'll
bit.
see you guys.
Okay. Just know that I posted a playlist link up that doesn't have any videos in it yet because the Zoom recording hasn't finalized. And so it usually takes Zoom about 24 hours to finalize the recording, and then it'll post up into YouTube. So you'll see it there. But you have the playlist link where it's going to go. So there's no question about that. It will be there by Monday. If you don't see it for whatever reason, you don't need to talk to anybody else. You can just email me directly at michaelforrester@webhsolutions.com. I'm gonna post that right here. Okay, so just email me and I'll just check it. Just means maybe something got hung up in the process, but I just did this yesterday and the day before and they all showed up. So, just let me know. Okay. Any questions before we move on to just a little bit of practice and we'll close out the day?
How do you think this compares to the other associate level exams?
Well, the lab component makes it a little bit harder, but most of the sysops people like Linux admins and whatnot are hands-on anyway. So honestly, they kind of enjoy it.
Think it's
The-
easy. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because as long as you're not scared of it, which, is a thing, actually, people are like get all tense and panicked about it. The architecture exam is the most frequently taken exam in the entire pantheon of exams, but it also covers the broadest swath of services. The developer one covers a much narrower set, but it is actually code. There's no coding involved, but it is code relevant. So, it just depends. If you're a coder, you're going to find the developer exam straight up. If you're an architect, that one's a little harder just from a breadth standpoint, but for the most part, it's about design. So as long as you're familiar with the Will Architect framework, you'll do great. This is the only one that has hands-on material, but again, the audience that's targeting loves hands-on. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does the how does maybe you already covered this, or sorry if I missed it, but the exam, how does that weight between the questions and the lab stuff? Like, is it a 40-60 split or 50-50 or
it's variable. It's not predictable.
I mean, like the scoring of it, or even that's not known?
Mm-mm. No, it shifts at the time that the exam is initiated. So, I mean, it range-wise, it'll like 40 to 60% will be questions, or 40 to 60% will be the labs, but you won't know. They won't tell you.
I mean, as far as the volume of questions.
Again, you won't know. Sometimes you'll have 5 labs on the lab side, so that means you have a reduced set of questions. Sometimes you'll have 3 labs on the lab side, and that means an increased set of questions. So
Oh, okay. I think I gotcha. And then, so is it like, what does it say? There's 65 questions. So those
65
say-
scoring opportunities. It doesn't say questions. It says 65 scoring opportunities.
scoring opportunities. So like the lab one, like one lab is 5 of those or something, maybe, or something like that. Like each time
Exactly.
you have a lab,
Each
it's-
lab is typically 5. Yeah.
Okay. And you might have covered this just for myself, I guess, but is you just like kind of roll, is it like you do all the paper questions and then you do the labs, or it's just intermixed?
No, they're not intermixed. You do one phase and then the other phase. They do
Okay.
not mix the labs with questions. You either do all the questions and finish that, and then you do the labs and finish that.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They don't. That's too much shifting of mindset to go from hands-on to theoretical.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Good. Other questions? Jim, any questions? You good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. All right, let's do a little bit of practice and then we'll call it. Okay. So here's what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna analyze the first few questions, and actually I'm gonna pick questions I don't have the answer for. Why? Number 23. Here we go. And then we're gonna walk through, do some analysis, and then what we'll do is for the last few is I'll just give you 2 minutes and you're gonna answer it, A, B, C, or D. Okay, or E in some cases. All right, so with this one, we got a sysops admin, and don't be intimidated by the length of the question, right? Some of the answers will quickly eliminate themselves. Sysops
Yeah.
admin,
Sharing the screen, or
you know what? Probably would be helpful if I shared my screen. Wouldn't it?
it'd be harder to, it would be harder for me probably to not
Just
see it.
give it to
Yeah.
you verbally. Yeah, that would be a test, wouldn't it? We're gonna give you an oral exam. All right, so hopefully you can see my screen now. Okay. So, well, hold on, let me just make sure I shared the right thing because that acted weird. There we go. All right, so we got a sysops admin who wants to grant the user the ability to pass any of the approved sets of roles to an EC2 service upon launching the instance. So they want to be able to pass a role That's the exact language they use. So that when an EC2 instance boots, it can assume the security identity of that role. That's what roles are. They're just security disguises. That's all they are. Where you're like, you know what? I'm not Michael Forrester right now, even though I am at my core. I'm now the CEO. So it doesn't change the fact that my core identity is still Michael Forrester, but now I'm the CEO and I got a whole different set of permissions, right? That's what a role is. So they want to enable the user to start an EC2 instance with the assigned role. So in effect, so the applications that are running on the instance are going to basically run as the role that's assigned to the service, right? Because, you know, if I do actions as the CEO, then I'm going to have that set of permissions, right? So which of the following, they're saying you got to select 2, right? Out of the 5. Which of the following will allow you to grant a user the ability to pass a role, an approved set of roles actually, to an EC2 instance on launch? So they're like, which one of these makes sense, right? And so sometimes, by the way, it's like independent, like there's an A solution and a B solution. Sometimes it's A1 and A2, meaning they're like linked. But in this particular case, there's like, which of the following should the admin do to accomplish the requirement of being able to grant someone the ability to pass roles to an EC2 service? So here they're like, set up an IAM permissions policy attached to the IAM user that allows the user to pass only those roles approved. Afterwards, create a service control policy for the role that allows the service to assume the role. So first of all, I know this one's wrong because service control policies are part of a service called AWS Organizations, not IAM. And service control policies never grant, but they do allow, if that makes any sense. So it doesn't say anything about organizations though, so this is throwing me off a little bit because I don't think this is part of the answer. The next is set up an IAM permission policy with a role that determines the actions it must perform. A little weird. Afterwards, create a trust policy for the role, allows the service to assume the role. That is true, actually. You do actually need to allow services access to the role so they can assume it. Something's still a little squirrely about that one, but that could be a possible answer. Set up IAM permissions policy attached to the IAM user that allows the user to pass only those roles that are approved. Use the pass to service and get role policy permissions to allow the user to get details of the role to be passed. Seems a little weird. Pass to service. I don't think that even exists actually, and I don't know why I would give a get role, like to get details of the role. I don't know why I would use a pass to service name. So that's got some red flags on it. Set up a service control policy that allows users to pass only those roles that are approved. Afterwards, create a trust policy for a role that allows the service to assume the role. That sounds interesting because service control policies are part of organizations and you don't attach them to IAM users. So that's definitely out. And then set up an IAM permissions policy attached to the user that allows the user to pass those roles that are approved. Use the IAM pass role and get role permissions in order for the user to get details of the roles. Now that actually makes sense to me, although I'm still a little weirded out as to why I would need pass role to get the user details, but I think they're talking just about this. That's the part that they're talking about. So this sounds right. And I could be completely wrong about it. And oddly enough, out of the ones that are left, it seems like this one would be the one that I would look at.
I
Right?
was thinking that they said, or I don't know, I always thought like they never made up stuff in these questions. Like IAM pass to service, that like they wouldn't put in a fake thing. But I don't know if that's completely true.
Well, and it probably is a real thing, but it might not be a real thing for IAM. So they tend to not use false, like, but they might use one from Systems Manager instead of one from IAM. So they won't use one that doesn't exist, but they'll use they'll use one from another service. But you could be right. This could be legit because I may not remember that pass to service is actually a legit thing, right? So, maybe that's it. But I just want to say this.
This question's a tough one for me. I'm not trying to say that's the right answer. I just thought that they they didn't make stuff up. So.
They don't, but they will steal stuff from other services and put them in the wrong context.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's funny that that you're the first person who's ever said that, and that's actually accurate. They typically will not make up non-existent things.
Yeah, because sometimes, and that's probably my own, like, I just don't know, but I'll see some questions and I'll be like, oh, that's not real, is it? And stuff. But I think,
It's-
I think that all the things they say are real. Yeah.
The only thing I've ever seen on the exam that wasn't real was a Infinidash. You guys all remember that debacle last year with Infinidash?
No.
So there was like a Twitter storm where someone said, hey, if I tweet about a service enough that doesn't actually exist, everyone will believe it's real and they'll be like, people will, write articles about it. And sure enough, they did. It was called Infinidash and it didn't exist. Someone wrote an exam question with it in there. And we got removed, but it cracked me up there for a while.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is crazy. There's so many services in AWS, and then the services have all the different configurations and details. So it's the lexicon of terms is massive, right?
It's massive.
Yeah,
And
it's
some of the names are super weird, like look out for metrics, look out for, it's just like, anyway, I'm not in charge of that, so I just let that go. But does everything I just said as far as like make sense as far as like how I delineated that? Like I knew that service control policies were not part of this whole equation. I knew that this wasn't either. And then you heard me say that pass to service, I don't think is one that exists inside of, but I could be wrong. So let's check it out. So AWS API passed to service. Let's see. Actually, there is. Hold on. It's an STS thing. Oh God, it's an STS thing. That's interesting. Let's find out. STS is secure token service.
yeah. See, they all the stuff they say is real.
So in this particular case, it's actually a status more than anything, right? It says this was passed to like with service. It was actually passed to a service. But I was right in the sense of that pass role is actually what the action that you use. But where they're checking for a condition here where it says what was this like the past to service is EC2. It's actually checking a condition. It's actually not an action per se. It is an API call, but it's a GET. It's not an execute. So interesting. So I didn't know that. So now I learned something new, but this is the whole reason we do the practice exams, right? Is to understand like how these things function. So that's good. So let's do 2 more with analysis, and then I'm going to let you kind of do your own analysis. Wow, that's a lot. Okay, so as a part of a yearly data cleanup, you need to delete all unused S3 buckets and their contents. The Tutorials Dojo bucket, which contains several educational video files, has both versioning and MFA delete features enabled. Ooh, this is going to be fun. One of your system engineers who has an administrator account tried to delete an S3 bucket using the command remove bucket. However, the operation fails even after repeated attempts, which is true because just so you know, you can't delete an S3 bucket that has objects in it. They're just not going to let you do it. And when you turn on versioning, every single change made to that object inside of a bucket where versioning is enabled creates another object. So if those video files have been edited, let's say the metadata was edited 5 times, there's 5 different versions of those video files. So then the question becomes, what is the policy if you have a bucket that has MFA delete and versioning enabled with objects inside of it? How do you then delete the bucket? You don't need it anymore, right? How do you do that? So all right, so 1, remove the policy that requires MFA delete, use the SDK to remove the delete markers and versions, delete the bucket again using the same CLI before. That actually seems legit, actually, right off the bat. Delete all markers from the bucket and then run the command again to fully delete the bucket and contents. I don't know about that one. Use the S3RB command again with an additional force option. Ooh, I don't remember if it has a force option on it, but we can't look it up. So let's just keep that in our back pocket because that actually could be true. Use the SDK to send delete requests to remove all objects in your bucket. Ensure that you've included the X Amazon MFA header in all requests, which contains the MFA authentication code. Afterwards, retry to delete the bucket with the same. Actually, that would probably work, honestly. All objects in the bucket, but does that gather the versions? That's a possibility. Have the root owner suspend MFA versioning? No. Typically, we don't recommend logging in as the root user. If that's the answer, then I'm going to have to flag this question, although it's not on the exam, but I would flag it and be like, oh my God, Let's check it and see, because I could be completely off base. Let's see what they say. Oh, I was wrong. They're saying this is the answer. Interesting. So the root account owner, by the way, does have full access to the entire account. But man, I don't think this question would pass muster if it was an actual exam question. Let's see here. Why is that other answer wrong? Although it's correct to use the header under, it's still not enough to delete the whole bucket. You have to remove all existing delete markers. Ah, the delete markers that are part of versioning. So bad. But now we know, right? So first of all, you can only use the force parameter to delete a non-empty bucket. So I didn't know that. So again, we're learning that, right? Mainly because I do everything programmatically. And then all of this obviously didn't work because we deleted all the objects, but we didn't delete the delete markers, which themselves are objects. I know this sounds weird, but with versioning turned on, when you delete an object, you then have to delete the delete marker for the object, because then there's different versions and there's a delete marker. So that's interesting. Delete all markers, although it's correct to remove all the delete markers, you still have to remove the objects, and that's true. So you need to remove the markers and the objects from the bucket, which is exactly what this said right here, is to remove all the buckets, delete markets and markers and object versions. So now we know. We now know that with versioning turned on inside of S3, it's going to create objects, and it's going to create delete markers if those objects have been deleted. So in order for you to actually remove the bucket, you've got to get rid of the object versions, the objects themselves, and the delete markers. So anything that doesn't do that is not going to be a possible answer. Now, the other way that they accomplish this is that with the root user, they suspended versioning in the bucket. Then they figured a lifecycle rule to delete both the objects and the non-current object versions, and then they permanently purged all the objects and the delete markers, then deleted the bucket again. I probably wouldn't have let that pass, actually. But there we go, right? So now we understand where the line in our thinking was incorrect. So or mine in this case, right? Is that I did not make sure to include all the objects and the delete markers in the answer, right? Otherwise, if we had, it probably would have worked. This answer would have been valid. Okay.
That the life cycle rule thing on that last one, that at least at first seemed a little weird. So it's a life cycle rule to expire current objects.
Yeah, so S3 has the ability to configure lifecycle rules, which allows you to move objects into different storage classes. One of the storage classes, oddly enough, is deletion.
Oh, so that's what they're saying with that, is that the life cycle rule is delete current object version. So delete everything. And everything that's not current too, like delete everything is what, so it's achieving it by a life cycle rule.
Exactly. Yeah. And then at the very end, it says, then delete your bucket again, which, by the way, you wouldn't do you can't do in a life cycle rule. You can't delete buckets. So it's a little bit of a condensed question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was thinking life cycle means put it in Glacier or something versus to delete it, but I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, so like you can move it to infrequent access, then move it down to Glacier, like deep archive, and then have it delete. Or you can just have it go from S3 standard to delete. Like you can define that however you want, but delete is one of the options. All right, let's do one more. Let's see. Let's go to one we haven't done. Here we go. All right. This one's a straight up recall question, so this is good. Somebody's got a Node.js application that's going to be hosted on AWS. They have to send messages across various subcomponents that are hosted in an auto-scaling group of EC2 instances. And they want to make sure the order of messages should be preserved. Whoa. Okay. Now, the minute they say order of messages being preserved, the first thing, even without looking at the answers, the first thing I think about is they're either talking about SNS FIFO queues, first in, first out, or they're talking about SQS FIFO queues, first in and first out, because those are the only two services that preserve the order of messaging as delivered. Kinesis doesn't preserve the order of messaging. Standard queues don't preserve order of messaging. SES doesn't support preserve the order of messaging. Those are the only two services. So MQ, if certain settings are on, could also preserve the order of messages, but it doesn't stay, not out of the box, it doesn't do that. So standard Amazon MQ doesn't, SNS topic doesn't, standard SQS queues don't, but an SQS FIFO queue That could work.
Oh, that's the
Okay.
only option. Yeah.
Yeah, so this, this one's kind of a little bit of a gimme, but remember on the associates level, they're like this. On the professional and specialty level, they're not really like this. So this is just one step above cloud practitioner. So they will give you very simple questions like this.
Okay. Do you know how they do that anyway? How do they know which is the first? Oh, because the queue is one place. There's not multiple queues, so they know the time that it came in, time of arrival.
Right. In other words, they put a timestamp and an identifier on it. And so when the next item comes in, it gets a timestamp and identifier. So even though there might be multiple producers putting in things into the queue, they all get into the queue with a certain milliseconds timestamp. So
Yeah, like if I were in Alaska sending it versus whatever, yours might get there before mine, but they're just looking at the time at the queue service, wherever that is. Yeah.
whenever it was inserted. And by the way, there's could be 100 backend
Oh.
servers that support the queue service, but when it enters the system, it gets tagged.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right, let's choose another one. Let's do a few, just a couple on our own, just to give you a feel. Okay. So I want you to take a minute or two. So it's let's say it's 10:57 right now. I'm going to check back at 10:59, but I want you to read the question and type in A, B, C, or D for your particular answer. And remember, do not fear getting it wrong. This is how we're going to learn, right? As you just saw, I got one of the questions wrong right off the bat. So take a minute, read, and then type in your answer in the chat. Okay. All right. So set up a lifecycle policy, moves files older than 60 days to infrequent access. It's a great option, right? How did you know, either one of you, either one can answer it. How did you know that it should be infrequent access versus Glacier Deep Archive? What was the key thing in the stem, in the top part of the question, that what requirement made it very clear that it was infrequent access?
I think it said available immediately in surprise audit, so you need to be able to get it. The Glacier, I think, or Glacier Deep Archive it takes some time. I can't remember how much to actually get the file, I believe.
Yeah, 5 to 12 hours on bulk, and I think let's say it's 3 to 5, but Deep Archive might be 5 to 12. Anyway, 3 hours at a minimum if it's Deep Archive. Now, just so you know, Glacier has an instant retrieval and a flexible retrieval. Instant retrieval takes milliseconds to retrieve. So if it had said instant retrieval, you would have had a problem because you could have chosen either answer. But they didn't do that. They chose Deep Archive, which definitely takes hours to recover. Good. Jim, anything to add to that as far as any distinctions?
Nope, same.
Okay, good. All right, let's do 2 more. All right, you got supply chain using Glacier to archive its data. You have to deploy or enforce compliance controls. So read this question, type your answer in. We'll check back in at 11:02. Or if you put both your answers in. Okay. Okay, so I see 1B. See? Good. All right, so what we're doing here is we're looking write once, read many. So we want to basically lock it. So what can we do to lock it? Well, oddly enough, C is actually the key feature called Glacier Vault Lock, which will allow you to lock an object. It's also sometimes called object lock, but in this case it's Glacier, so it's Vault. If it was S3, it would be object, right? But you can lock it so you can write once, read many times. So that object cannot be, it's almost like a legal or a governmental hold, right? So just know that's the answer for this one. Again, just one of those subfeatures. This is why we do the practice exams, right? To learn what these subfeatures are called, what their specific names are, and how to use them. All right, let's do one more. Last one. Okay. 2 minutes. So let's just make it, let's make it 11:04. It shouldn't be that long of a question. Good. Okay. So this is like a question, right? So first of all, we can automatically rule out this first sentence because quite frankly, they're all the same. Just so you know, and this would probably get moved up into like, we know that we need to use the restricted SSH AWS config manage rule. What other steps do we need to take in order to meet the requirements? So, none of it would be shifted. So we know we got an AWS config manage rule. The question that they're asking is basically do you know how remediation, like what other service has to get involved if AWS config notices the configuration change and wants to trigger a remediation? What do? We know that config can talk to a Lambda function. We also know that it can talk to EventBridge. We know it can talk to Systems Manager, but which one of these makes sense, right? Now, the easiest one to do in this, the most efficient one, which doesn't require you to code or do anything custom, is actually Systems Manager. And in this case, it then becomes a question of, is it automation or compliance? Well, I've never even heard of a compliance document. I'm sure there are compliance documents, but like I don't know that would be an action. So I saw C and then B. So one of these two is probably the right answer. Let's take a gamble on B. So the automation documents is where the actual like scripts that live that allow you to do things to other services. If we go look and say, well, why is compliance document wrong? Why doesn't this work? Compliance is a feature to scan nodes for patch compliances and inconsistencies. It doesn't actually do anything. It just reports. Whereas the automation document would actually do something to the security groups. Now, Lambda could actually do this, but you have to write code for that. Whereas the automation document just already has it ready to go. An EventBridge, just so you know, can't actually execute anything. It can report on things, but it can't actually do something to another service. So that alone will not get you to the remediation. Okay. Good. Questions about the methodology that we use on how to think about this, how to learn from this, right? Any questions about using these practice exams? Okay. Any questions about anything? Floor is open before we close.
Do you recall, is this like one of the longest exams?
No, this is one of the shortest exams, actually.
Oh, 3 hours, the shortest? Okay, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, let's go back to the. Just to
I
make
was
sure.
thinking that maybe it was longer because it had the lab things, but so this is the same as the like solution architect.
Yeah, so, oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, you're right. No, I stand corrected. So yeah, so this is the maximum length exam that you can have, but most of the specialty exams are either 170 or 180 minutes. So
Oh, it is the
over
length.
half of the exams are this length. But there's only 3 exams that are different than this. There's 3 exams that don't have this length. They're like 90 minutes and 130 minutes, if I remember correctly, respectively. So yes, you're right. In a sense, this is one of the longer exams, but it's the longer. Most of the exams are 3 hours.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. So like, I don't want it to stand out as like it's the only one that's 3 hours long. Most of them are 3 hours long. So yeah, let's go take a look. Make sure I'm just not pulling that out. Like this one is 180 minutes. That's the database specialty. Security, which is a doozy of an exam, that's 180 minutes. One of these is 170. It might be SAP, 170 minutes, right? So most of these, I definitely for certain the DevOps Pro exam, that thing is a beast, 180 minutes. The SAP professional exam, that's also 180 minutes, if I remember correctly, 170. Yeah. So only 3 exams are not 180 minutes. Most of them are 170, 180. Notice also that these are 75 questions in some cases, not 65. So yeah. Good. Other questions? Okay, so quick recap. Step 1, grab the exam guide, go through the domain section, make sure you know every service that's listed there. Step 2, grab your certification study guide from the WebH portal, or grab the ramp up guide for SysOps off of the AWS ramp up guide page. You can Google that and follow what's in there. Some of that's going to be expertise building by understanding design. Some of it's going to be hands-on labs. That's step 2. Step 3 is that you're either going to go to amazon.quicklabs.com or to workshops.aws, and you're going to do 4 or 5 additional labs that are related to services related to system operations. CloudWatch, observability, troubleshooting, CloudWatch logs, systems manager. You're going to do 4 or 5 additional labs, and you might end up using your own personal account if you're doing workshops at AWS. That's step 3. Step 4 is you're going to either use your voucher if you have one, or just go buy the System Operations Associates Lab off of tutorialsdojo.com. You're going to go to the review mode exams, not timed, not section, not final, review mode exams. And you're going to take that one exam until you can get a 90%. Then you're going to take a second exam. Doesn't even matter which one. There's 6 of them. You can take a second one until you get 90%. If you've never touched AWS before, you can take a third one until you get 90%. Once you've gotten 90% plus across 3 of the review mode exams, and you've done the 4 or 5 labs in step 3, you're ready to sign up and take your test. And that's it. That's all 4 steps, just condensed in a nutshell. Okay. Questions, concerns?
No, sounds good.
Okay. Michael.Forrester@WebH Solutions. Please email me if you want. This video should be up by by Monday. If you don't see it before, you see it by then, please let me know. But you got the playlist. I just pasted it in the chat. Also know that before I close, if you go to your chat window, if you're not using the web client, there should be 3 dots in the chat client. If you bring it up right next to the smiley face, if you click those 3 dots and click on save chat, it will save the chat into a local folder inside. I believe it's under my documents. So that way, if you didn't capture all the URLs, they can stay there. Okay.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that was a feature. Okay, cool.
Yeah. You know, that way, if you want the raw notes, you got them. Okay. All right. Well, that's it. I'm out for the day unless you've got something else. Anybody going once?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the lessons here.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're running any issues at all, just email me or open up your student portal and contact Greg Wagner if it's related to classes. He's super responsive and a great guy to work with. So Greg's your man if you need any help with any of the kind of logistics around classes and vouchers. Well, have a good weekend, and let me know when you pass. I'd love to hear about it.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thanks again.
See ya.